Hey, Cut the Shit listeners. You can find every episode on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Go check us out. Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to Cut the Shit, a podcast series that aims to take a closer look at the impact of the IT industry, both the good and the bad. Cut the Shit is brought to you by Plow Networks, a managed IT services company based just outside Nashville, Tennessee. I'm Bryan Link, COO here at Plow, and I'll be your host for this series. I'll ask questions, and with the help of our guests, try to dig deep on some of the key challenges we all face dealing with IT. So with that, let's cut the shit and get started. Hello, and welcome to 2024. I'm recording this on Friday, January 5th, so the new of the New Year's is already long gone. And now it's just January, hardly anyone's favorite month. But hey, this podcast releases on Tuesday, January 9th, which happens to be my birthday, so it ain't all bad. As you can probably tell, I'm solo today. This is my usual first of the year monologue about trends and expectations I have for the coming year. Notice I didn't say predictions, because I don't make those. That's a fool's game, especially when it comes to technology. My topics today will be split probably 50-50 between pure tech stuff and some IT business stuff, which is kind of where I live day to day, so I guess it makes sense. So with that, let's get started. Before I get to my topics today, I have two old school kind of tech sci-fi recommendations for you. One is a movie and the other is a novel, and both are from the early 1980s. They'll make sense when we get to the topics because they were on my mind given what's been going on lately. The movie is Blade Runner, the original with Harrison Ford, not the most recent one. I think Ryan Gosling was in it. If you've never seen it, or if you haven't seen it in a long time, do yourself a favor and watch it, ideally on the big screen. It's visually stunning, really incredible to see, and actually pretty scarily accurate in its futuristic predictions. So that's kind of cool, even though it's fairly dystopian. The same for the novel. The novel's William Gibson's novel Neuromancer, which was published shortly after Blade Runner. Again, I think it was like 1983 or 84 for both of them, maybe a little earlier. I read it a long time ago, in the late 80s, and I just started reading it again. I found it somebody mentioned it in a newsletter that I read, and I've forgotten about it, so I picked it back up. And I just can't believe how accurate he was with his predictions. Again, it's another one of those that's sort of crazy when you read it. And it's also just a damn good story. Reads super fast, so worth checking out. Okay, with that, let's get to the good stuff. 2024 is upon us, and as I look around the IT business world, I see a few things that I think are worth pointing out, or at least checking out. And some of them are pretty obvious, big major trends, so I'll try to provide a little bit of a perspective or something about those that's maybe a little different. And the others are sort of out of left field or not necessarily down the middle, so I'll try to explain why I think they're worth mentioning. You can't really start without starting with AI, especially generative AI. That's been the topic of the year for 2023. And as we look into 2024, you're already seeing it, so it's not really a prediction, but we're kind of moving away, it seems like, from what I'd call hype to reality. People are moving beyond playing with ChatGPT and thinking about, all the what ifs and are actually figuring out ways to try to use this stuff. I'm thinking specifically around businesses. What you do individually, it's a little bit different, although obviously there's a Venn diagram there, they're related. But in terms of thinking about applications, practical applications inside a company, we're starting to see a lot of that. We're doing it at Plow. I have no doubt your company's probably doing it as well in some form or fashion. You might not even know it, actually. It could be quite possible that someone in your company's playing around with it right now, and you're not aware. And if that's the case, I don't know that that's all bad. One of the nice things about distributed technologies is that very thing, that they can be widely, they don't have to live in a silo. It could be someone in accounting, or it could be someone in operations or logistics who's doing it. In our case, we've got a marriage between we're a tech company, so kind of everybody's technologically oriented, but we've got kind of the development side of our business working with operations to figure out if we can use AI to manage some of our service management tactics or jobs in helping assign tickets and assign project work or task work to people based on rules. So that's an example of what we're doing in our company. And, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal recently about they called them early, first movers or whatever. I don't know if that's really true. There were some use cases that they found out there, and they were pretty predictable. That doesn't make them any less powerful, but they were fairly predictable. They were kind of rules-based, sort of what I'd call decisioning engines, or ways of helping people, kind of decision guidance mechanisms. So, digital assistants. So I think I think Travelocity or somebody called it that. There was an example of Wayfair trying to use AI to help people do, speculative design work on the website. So those are all the kinds of things that I think we're going to see more of in 2024. And if I'm in your seat, and I assume if you're listening to this, you didn't just stumble upon it and have no interest in technology, you either work in IT or you manage IT, you're a business person that oversees IT. I'd be asking questions across your company about, hey, is anybody thinking about this stuff? Where are areas that you guys feel like you could leverage AI to streamline tasks, find ways to reduce manual labor, or repetitive manual labor in particular, within the workflows of your company. And that's the best place to start. And honestly, all the other stuff that's going on is interesting and cool and might yield something, but that's by definition speculative. If you've got repetitive tasks that you can automate and you leverage AI to do it, that's not speculative at all. That's real. Go do it. That's what we're doing, and I think that's what you ought to do as well. That's kind of all I'll say about AI. Whatever happens with Sam Altman and Microsoft and the lawsuit from the New York Times and all of that stuff, and the fear of AI taking over the world and the singularity and I don't know, job losses, who knows what all of that means and is going to turn out to be. What I do know is the tools you have today, you can apply them inside your company to yield improvements, productivity improvements, and provide some help to the folks on your teams to get things done faster and more accurately. Nothing wrong with that. Get to it. That's what I say. Kind of in a related, the other big topic for 2023 that carries over into 2024 is cybersecurity. Again, kind of like AI, there's sort of two threads or two strands of thinking on cybersecurity. There's the sort of the negative and the positive, right? The negative of cybersecurity is we're screwed. There's nothing we can do. We're always gonna, we're just basically we're all one step away, one click away from being hacked and having the Russians or the Koreans in our systems, or the bad guys, the criminals holding us hostage, holding our files hostage, and demanding hundreds, thousands, millions of dollars. And while all that's true, that's the reality of the world we live in. It doesn't mean all is lost, right? We all seem to continue to be operating and making things happen. There are tools out there to improve security, with what's happening with Zero Trust, which we're putting a lot of focus on at Plow. There's a real opportunity, I think, to flip the script on the sort of on the cybersecurity game by embracing. It's almost a little bit like jujitsu, where you use the power of your opponent against them. Zero Trust sort of does that by starting with the assumption that you're going to get breached. So what do you do with that assumption? If you start there, it changes the way you think about security. So there are things happening, I think, inside the industry that are very realistic, that give us a really good chance to put us in a better position to deal with the world we live in today, as opposed to just either hand-wringing or trying to build walls around things, because that's not worked. We've tried that and it doesn't work. At the same time, there's a positive, that I just wove in some positive aspects to a negative story. At the same time, the budgets for spending on IT are not unlimited, right? And companies, we're seeing that already in companies out there who are either tightening budgets in terms of cutting back or holding flat while cutting other areas of technology spend, maybe in sort of the infrastructure, sort of core IT sides, trying to find, basically expecting folks running those parts of the organization to do at least the same with a little less, maybe not more with less, but the same. And cybersecurity is usually very heavily dependent on those other areas, those sort of foundational IT areas. So, the challenge facing you, if you're dealing with cybersecurity or your company, is how do you make sure that you're protected? How do you prioritize your bets on the money that you've got to spend when it comes to cybersecurity? Because, let's face it, none of us have all the dollars we need. And while just spending more money on cybersecurity won't solve all of your problems, having a little more money to spend can certainly help, especially if you're way behind, right? And you don't have the technology. It's one thing to have the technology you need and not have it, configured and rolled out properly. It's another thing to not have it at all, right? And those are two different types of challenges. And if you fall into that latter where you don't have what you need and you're budget constrained, you're going to have to get creative. One of the beauties of thinking of an approach like Zero Trust, again, Zero Trust is not a product, it's an approach or a methodology. And so there are things you can do even with limited technology services to put your company in a better position from a security standpoint in terms of dealing with cybersecurity risk. As long as you've got MFA and you've got some web-based tools like if you're using Microsoft 365 or something like that, you can do conditional access. You can do least privilege access for your admins so that you don't have the keys to the kingdom available to folks inside your company, which is a very, very common thing that we see. In fact, most of our clients that have had breaches, what has happened is it's been credential compromise from an admin, someone who had universal access inside environments. So those are really problematic. And so if there's two things I could tell you to do, and these don't cost any money, assuming you've got Microsoft 365, is make sure you've got conditional access set up and you've defined, it's exactly what it sounds like. Access is conditional on some rules. Don't let people outside the country access your environment without explicit approval, something like that. Or if you know there are specific geographies where people should not be, especially outside of the U.S., because that's where most phishing and sort of bad guy malware stuff comes from. And then the second thing around conditional access would be to make sure that if you've got there are travel rules you can put in place too, so that if someone tries to log in from Nashville, Tennessee at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, and then they try to log in from LA at 2:15 p.m., 15 minutes, that's impossible, right? So those are two simple rule sets you can put in place that can minimize, credential compromise. And then obviously I mentioned least privilege access for admins. Your IT folks may not like it too much because it creates overhead for them. And so oftentimes they don't want to do this, but you can set up a set of rules where nobody is a global admin ever. They have to promote themselves to global admin to make universal changes. And then once they finish the job, they basically demote themselves and they're no longer a global admin. And they make a note of why they promoted themselves and what they were doing. Again, it takes a little bit of extra time for your IT people, but again, this is the biggest risk point for getting into an environment or a tenant, if you will, for being able to steal if you have credentials compromised and you're a global admin, what they can do, and we've seen this, they can then take getting in as a global admin, they can then go to other people's emails, change the recipients of those emails so that they can send and receive emails from the CEO of the company or the CFO. And they can email clients and say, hey, John, this is Fred, CFO from company ABC. We've had a banking change, and for the invoice, you've got an invoice that's due. Rather than sending it to the bank you have on record, please send it to this account, this routing number and bank account number. Thanks. Here's the form. It's already filled out. You can use this to submit to get that payment made, and you can go ahead and submit it. And they can start stealing money from you. You won't know it. And that's with least privilege access from an admin perspective. It's very, very hard to do that unless they get the exact person that they need. So just keep that in mind. Again, basically $0 ways you can improve security today if you're dealing with a situation where funds are a problem. On the same kind of along the same lines, I just mentioned, account compromise or credential compromise. Almost all of that happens because of emails and passwords, right? Traditional systems we're used to using, everybody's got email. It's critical business communication tool. Almost all email systems are still password based, right? So the way you access your email is you put in your name, you put in your email, your username, you either type in a password or you use a password manager to enter that password, etc. Passwords are inherently poor, are an inherently poor security technology, right? They're easily compromised. To make them very complicated makes them impossible to remember. So unless you're using a password manager, nobody uses a complicated password because it's too damn hard to remember. They should be changed very frequently, which again causes problems for the users because it's a pain in the butt to change them. You got to do it, and then you got to remember it again and all that stuff. Update your password manager. At the end of the day, passwords suck. They're the core. They're the initial security kind of measure we used for accessing systems, but they're bad. They're not good from a security standpoint. So I think we're seeing the death of passwords. It's going to be a slow death, but we're seeing it. It's already started. I mean, biometric access, anybody who's used an iPhone or an Android phone with a thumbprint or with face recognition knows how much better, it's a better user experience, and it's much more secure than passwords, right? Now that still sits on top of passwords, but that's okay because the password for the most part, at least as it relates to that device, you can still access it, but you think about it, we're only one step away from making it where the only way to access a device would be through the biometric without having to go to somewhere else. And that's what brings us to this idea of the passkey. And most of you probably heard of passkeys. They go back to they're basically a digital version, if you will, of the old token-based key fob that you would use to access things, right? So it's more of a permanent or a hard access to a particular system. And with passkeys, by having digital passkeys along the lines of what we're talking about, you could really secure access to applications or devices because you'd have to leverage the passkey to be able to enter your password. It's almost like a two-step or a linked access to a system as opposed to the password-based model we have today. So I think we're going to see a whole lot more. This isn't a prediction. Again, it's already happening. I just think we're going to see it accelerate because so much of what's happening negatively from a cybersecurity perspective is around credential compromise, is around password, the ability to get access to usernames and passwords. And with passkeys, even if you got that, it doesn't give you the keys to the kingdom. And that's really what we're trying to, that's really what we have to stop. And so I think between what we're seeing with further expansion of biometrics, as well as, expansion in the use of passkeys, combined with, again, hopefully we'll see continued, acceptance and rollout of zero trust methodologies along the lines of what I was talking about earlier. Those things together can begin to change, I think, the game as it relates to cybersecurity, and put the good guys, that would be us and you and anybody else out there who's trying to do things legitimately, on a stronger footing as it relates to the bad actors out there, and really kind of beating them at their own game, if you will, because at some point they've gone after low-hanging fruit, right? That's all they're doing is looking for where are the vulnerabilities. Ultimately, the limitations for security really come down to user experience and the overhead associated with those technologies, and that's why things like biometrics have such strong appeal, because there's such a great user experience. They're easier than dealing with passwords. Same really with password managers and passkeys. Assuming the user experience is set up correctly, they're no more complicated than what we have today. They're just a lot more secure. So if you put that together with some good hygiene, some good security hygiene around a zero trust approach, around, good conditional access, least privilege for admin access, and those sorts of things, you can really eliminate a lot of your potential risk without and feel really good about it. It doesn't make you immune to it, as we said. With zero trust, there is no such thing. You have to you should be expecting a breach. And so what are you going to do if you do have it? But you can minimize the risk. And so I think we're going to continue to see progress in that area in 2024. And I think that's really exciting because God knows if you're worried about that kind of stuff, it basically paralyzes you. You can't think about anything else. And you can't really think about how do you leverage IT to help your business get better at doing what it does. I mean, because hell, if your cybersecurity is perfect, it doesn't make you competitive as a business. You haven't done anything to help a customer yet. All you've done is make sure you've eliminated existential risk for your business, which hell, you got to do, but it doesn't get you there yet. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was, this is a perennial issue for our industry, and that's finding and keeping, good talent. In scanning the headlines and reading the last couple of months, there's always talk about, I mean, obviously I'm sitting here talking about, trends and expectations for 2024. Lots of other people have been talking about it too. So there's been lots of retrospectives about 2023. Lots of, again, sort of, here's maybe what we can expect in 2024. And a lot of times when you're talking about IT, you hear a lot about talent. Now, very often that talk is heavily focused around certain types of what I'd call highly specialized technology workers, cybersecurity talent as an example. We're just talking about that, or really developers, high-end developers, that sort of thing. And those are always going to be hard to find. I mean, when you get to the top of the pyramid in any industry, finding great people is going to be a challenge because there's just not that many of them. I mean, there's a reason, professional athletes get paid so much because there's just not that many people that can do what they do. That's the way it is. There's way more demand for talent than there is supply. And that's not any different for cybersecurity gurus or, great CIOs or whatever. Further down the pyramid though, there's challenges there. They're just different. Right. And so when I think about, our business, we're in the IT services business. We're not a development shop, right? We're doing network management. We're doing cloud management and cloud services. We're doing end user support, and endpoint device management, that sort of stuff. That's more technician and engineering and sort of foundational IT skill sets needed than development. We have some development capability on the team and they make a big impact, but that's a small piece of our labor puzzle. And, the reality is finding folks in that realm is its own challenge too. There's a lot more of them, if you will, in terms of actual and potential than there are senior level cybersecurity people, but they're very distributed, right? And they have lots of opportunities as well. And frankly, the business is changing such that it seems to me there's a bit of a melding between the development, and I'm going to use development here in quotes, and sort of the traditional operational IT side. And that's really the AI piece, right? There's this, if you're going to leverage AI and you're going to write scripts and build tools for your business to help improve productivity, which is clearly an IT or a technology function, right? We just mentioned earlier, it could be distributed in an organization, but somebody has to have enough knowledge of the business to know how to apply this tool, right? Because at the end of the day, AI is a tool just like anything else, right? Just like writing code, programming is just a tool. Just because you know how to program, and doesn't mean they can go drop you in an architectural company and you can help them. You have to understand architecture and what they're trying to do to build technology to help the architects or the company itself be better at what it currently does. This is no different. Leveraging AI means you need to understand the technology, but you also have to understand the business. And I think that matching or that crossover, maybe a Venn diagram of those skill sets is going to be, I think it's going to have to be built. It's not, you don't go to school for that right now. It's too new, right? So we're looking at how do we take folks on our team, educate them about these things, get them into experimenting with these, with leveraging these tools. Again, those are already on the operational side. How do we get them a little bit exposed to the AI side? And the development guys, how do we make sure that they have a clear, tight link to the operational side of the house so that they get a good chance to identify problems and think about ways, hey, I have an idea for how we might be able to use this AI bot to help you with that operational workflow issue you're dealing with. They got to understand the workflow before they can figure out how to help make it better. And I think that's true across the board. And so I think that's sort of an interesting wrinkle in the IT talent search, because it doesn't mean it's going to be very unlikely that you're going to be able to recruit for people who already can do what you need them to do relative to your particular area. It's too new, and there's too much crossover. So we're back to the basics, right, of hiring. There's the old hire for attitude versus aptitude and all these sort of, little bromides about the way to hire. But I do think it's almost like we need technology liberal arts majors to a certain degree, people who understand a little bit of networking, who have, and who understand maybe a little bit of systems and maybe a little bit of AI. But what they're really good at is learning, right? They're curious. They get sort of how baseline technology works, but what they really are good at is learning more and more and more, right? Because this is a learning industry. As I would say, anytime in the first week of January, if we're talking about forward-looking stuff, if you look to next year at this same time, who the hell knows what will have happened in the next 12 months to change the nature of the conversation I'm having right now. There's going to be new stuff that's happening, old things that we believed, old paradigms that are going to be broken. It happens every year. It's too fast. So you can't, this is the challenge that formal education has when it comes to technology. This is why you have lots of people, the Peter Thiels of the world, who are like, don't go to college, just start programming, right? Just start learning code, because it's such a dynamic, it's hard. Doesn't mean going to college is bad. Obviously he went to Stanford and got a degree in philosophy. So it doesn't mean college is bad, but it's hard to learn the skills as someone who's trying to hire people, as you and I are. You can't just go to the school and say, knock on the door and say, hey, I need 10 people to help me do this thing. That doesn't exist. There might be 10 really smart people who could help you, but they've never solved that problem. They're going to have to come learn and figure it out. So I think that's the challenge we all have when it comes to the talent side is how do we find people that fit in our culture, that want to learn and have the raw material to be able to learn quickly? And then how do you get them enough problems and enough exposure to both the business and the technology side to be able to really make an impact on your company? And I don't think that's a challenge for 2024. I think that's a challenge for the foreseeable future. That's probably the same challenge we had 10 years ago. The problems were different. Maybe it's just a little more exaggerated now because of how, with some of the new stuff that's happened. Obviously, the introduction of AI and really the distribution of AI and the way it's now, and we've had AI for a while, but generative AI and the tools we have available it's a sea change, right? This is very new, right? Probably along the lines of like cloud computing in terms of when that really came to the fore, and maybe even back to sort of cellular technologies and then the internet itself. I mean, we've had some big shifts with a bunch of little waves, every year in between for sure. So that was a little bit of a, a little long-winded. Apologize for that, but hopefully you get what I'm saying as far as we think about that trend. And the last piece on the technology, on the tech talent side is now with the distributed workforce and work from anywhere, you can recruit in your own town or your own geography if you want to, but you don't have to, right? So that also means people are recruiting in your geography for jobs other places. That it scrambles the deck and makes it even harder to know where to go to look to find good candidates. So, it's the paradox of choice, right? Having too many options is sometimes worse than having a constrained, smaller list of options. And that's sort of where we are with recruiting. Lots and lots of choices, very difficult to tease out or screen or identify, predictively what skill sets maybe make sense. Me sitting here saying you need to have people who want to learn and are good at learning. The truth is the only way to find that out is if they start working for you, and then you can see, but that's after the fact. That makes it tough. That means you might have people who work for you a while who then have to move on. And that creates some turmoil and some churn, and that's really hard to deal with. So we're all trying to avoid that. We don't want that, and neither do you. But it may be the reality that we've got for technology jobs in general. It's just too dynamic. Okay, so those are just a few of the trends that are on my radar, and as we head into 2024, and hopefully they're interesting enough to you to do some research on them or give them some thought. Really, it's anyone's guess as to what we'll highlight this time next year. As I mentioned, January 2025, which I can't even to say 2025 out loud. It's sort of hard to believe, but who knows what we'll be highlighting at that point. So, I think at this point, it's best to, the best defense is a good offense, so to speak. So we should just keep focusing on what's in front of us, take what's given, and not try to get too bunged up and, looking around corners, so to speak. That's kind of all I've got. I hope you enjoyed today's talk. Again, I know it's solo, so it's a little, this is not my favorite, but I hope it's helpful or at least useful. It kicks us off for the year. We can only way to go from here is up. So we got that going for us. If you enjoyed today's podcast, or even if you didn't, drop us a line at cuttheshit@plow.net. Love to hear from you. And you've got any suggestions or thoughts or advice on topics you'd like to hear us cover, please let us know. With that, take care. Happy New Year, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would become a subscriber wherever you get your podcasts. And if you could rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, that would really help us out. Or you can just go old school and tell your friends, your family, your colleagues, and hell, anybody else who you think might want to hear something like this to listen in. If you're on social media, make sure to follow us on TikTok @CutTheShitPod, all one word, where we post lots of clips from the podcast. And last but not least, you can also watch the YouTube version of the show on our YouTube channel @Plow Networks. Until next time, take care and have a great day.